Okay, so I can only have 15-minute video, so I'm just going to pick up right where I left off. And we're going to talk about how neurons communicate. So we've kind of looked at the smaller picture of neurons independently, and now we're going to look at how they communicate with one another. So the really important information you need to know is that everything that needs to happen happens in the synapse. Remember, the terminal branches, they're going to release the neurotransmitters into the synapse. It's going to be absorbed by the receptor sites of the receiving neurons' dendrites, and any of those extra neurons kind of hanging up are sucked back up in the reuptake process to be kind of shot back out next time the action potential goes through that neuron. Neurotransmitters, I definitely check out the list of neurotransmitters that I've given you in your packet. It kind of goes more in detail over those neurotransmitters. Biggest thing you want to obviously understand is these are chemical messengers that are communicating between the synapse. So acetylcholine, this has to do with function, it has to do with motor movement and possibly memory. Remember, we don't know for sure, but it's very possible. Okay. Dopamine then, that function is motor movement and alertness. If you have a lack of dopamine, it's going to result possibly in Parkinson's disease, hand tremors and things like that. And an overabundance is associated with schizophrenia. Those positive symptoms of schizophrenia, remember, positive doesn't mean good. Symptoms like hallucinations and delusions. Serotonin is like the happy neurotransmitter. It helps us deal with mood control. So if you have a lack of serotonin, you're going to probably have, there's definitely been a strong link to depression there. Endorphins, this is where you kind of get this runner's high, dealing with pain control. I think I shared with one class, I had that blister on my foot when I was running, but I got through it somehow, probably because of those endorphins. Others to know, you want to know norepinephrine has to deal with alertness, possibly depression as well. GABA is an inhibitor. If you have a lack of GABA, it's going to cause seizures and insomnia. Glutamate is an exciter. So those are just some of the ones you should know. Those are also included on your list in your packet. Okay, agonists and antagonists, I explained this in class. Remember, so your neurotransmitters fit into the receptor sites like a lock into a key, a key into a lock. What agonists do, they mimic the neurotransmitter. So for example, if you have a lack of serotonin, you might have a serotonin agonist. So it mimics the serotonin, it gets into the receptor site and gives you that good feeling. An antagonist, however, remember antagonists, like we talk about in literature, they're like the bad guys. Antagonists block that site altogether so your system cannot function normally. It won't let any other neurotransmitter into that receptor site. Divisions of the nervous system. Remember, we have our central nervous system, which is our brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system, which is on the periphery of the body, okay? When we break down our peripheral nervous system, first we can break it down to our somatic nervous system. I mentioned the somatic nervous system is working when I'm walking around the room or bending my arms or whatever. Those are voluntary movements of my muscles, right? And the autonomic nervous system, which is the other set of the peripheral nervous system, there's a fly on my computer right now. Okay, so that's going to control automatic stuff. Your heart beating, your lungs breathing, everything that's happening automatically that you don't have to think about consciously. When we break down the autonomic nervous system, we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Remember, sympathetic is if you're in some kind of like dire situation, you might get in that fight or flight situation, your sympathetic nervous system is being aroused. And then after that kind of fear or issue has passed, your parasympathetic nervous system helps calm you down. Remember, I think of like paramedic, and so that's like parasympathetic. Paramedics calm you down, parasympathetic nervous systems calm you down. And I just included in the PowerPoint that's also uploaded here some of that information that I just explained. Endocrine system, these are glands that secrete hormones. Remember this little runner guy that is not moving his torso but is moving his arms and legs? He's like the neurotransmitter, he's moving very quickly. Endocrine system, the hormones move much more slowly, so it's kind of like the snail. I had the diagram here. It's also in your book of the major endocrine glands. Know that our master gland is called the pituitary gland. Okay. Then we get to the brain, ways we study the brain, accidents like the case of Phineas Gage. He had the pole kind of stuck through his head, right? His personality changed afterwards. This is an example of a case study because I can't go around shoving poles through people's head. Lesions, that's when you remove or destroy some part of the brain. I believe in 7th period I showed you guys the lobotomist, where he actually did the frontal lobe lobotomies, kind of getting rid of those connections there. So very interesting stuff. An EEG, that's like if you were to go to get a sleep study done most times, or else I used to get migraine headaches, I mentioned, I got one of these done. You stick all the electrodes on your head, and then you get that readout that's kind of like that wavy shape. We'll know how to read that wavy shape in Chapter 5. A CAT scan then. A CAT scan is a 3D x-ray of the brain, so it's good for locating tumors, looking at kind of structure of the brain, but it doesn't really show us much more than that. An MRI then shows you a more detailed picture of the brain. It kind of turns them into a movie. You might have these on a disc that you get at home. A PET scan, this is going to show actually activity in the brain. It's going to measure glucose consumption, and glucose is showing us, okay, so that's a form of energy, so it's showing us how much energy we are using in that particular area of the brain. A functional MRI is a combination of the PET scan and an MRI, so it shows you activity and it shows you structure. So that kind of gives you the most information. That was a kind of video, that was a kind of test used in the love competition video we all watched. Okay, when we talk about the structures of the brain, this is going to be some memorization here. Do understand that the brain stem we see in this image right here, I kind of think like the brain stem is like the stem to the flower of our brain. So the medulla, that is involved in control of blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing. Remember the medal you might wear around your neck, it goes by your heart and your lungs, if that helps you remember. The reticular formation, remember that's my least favorite experiment ever done, explained in your book, but we find that the reticular formation, if it is severed, you will fall into a coma from which you can never wake up from again, because the reticular formation has to deal with alertness. Pons, that's located just above the medulla. This is involved in facial expression, sleep, and swallowing. You can think of these weird facial expression guys there. Okay, the thalamus then, that's in the center of our brain. One of our case studies that we looked at today had a tumor in the center of her brain, and we know she had issues with a lot of the sensory information going on. We know the thalamus is the sensory switchboard. It's going to receive sensory signals from all of our senses except for smell and kind of direct it where it needs to go. Think of, remember the traffic directors, Hal and Amos, and they're directing traffic in your brain. Cerebellum, that's back here. It's also referred to as the little brain. It kind of looks like a little brain, and that helps you with balance, coordination, and that kind of stuff. Think of the cerebellum like a person balancing with two barbells in their hand. The limbic system then is composed of the hippocampus, amygdala, and hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, remember hypothalamus, you're spraying llamas with water. This controls and regulates body temperature, sexual arousal, hunger, thirst, and also the endocrine system. The hippocampus is my favorite. Monica's poor hippo. He has his compass, but he's lost. He can't remember how to get home. So we know that the hippocampus has to do with the storage of memories. The amygdala then is this fear center. It's also involved in how we process memory. The more emotional memory is, the more likely it's going to be stored in our memory because it has kind of that charge for us. The cerebral cortex, this is kind of what's on the outside, right? It's called what we call gray matter. Those wrinkles all over our brain are called fissures. So it's really crazy if you like laid out our cerebral cortex, you ironed it out, right? It would be as big as a large pizza, but it sticks all in our brain. Lobes is definitely important to know the function of each of those lobes and the location. So this is the location of all of our lobes. We have the frontal lobe in the front. Parietal lobe, that's kind of on the side here. Temporal lobe is right above our ears. And then the occipital lobe is in the back. Remember, we have lobes, two of each, so one on each side. Frontal lobes have to do with abstract thought, critical thinking, reasoning, and emotional control. It also sends signals to our body controlling muscle movements. Also, it contains Broca's area, which is responsible for controlling muscles that produce speech. So if we had Broca's aphasia, we would not be able to produce the sounds, produce the words. Parietal lobes, then, these contain the sensory cortex that receives information, incoming touch sensations. It can also help us with information processing with math and memories. But if you were to get sunburn, that parietal lobe would be helping to help you feel that, right? The occipital lobe then deals with vision, our visual cortex, and it's interpreting messages that come from our eyes. And we're going to talk about vision in Chapter 4, which is our next chapter. Temporal lobes process sound sensed by our ears. I remember because the temporal lobe is by our ears. Corpus callosum, remember that's the bundle of nerve fibers that connect the two sides of our brain. It's right here in our brain, and that can be disconnected, especially for epilepsy. It's helpful to control seizures. I'd recommend checking out these split brain patient videos. Biggest thing you want to remember is the information that we get from our left visual field is processed by the right side of our brain. The information we get from our right visual field is processed by the left side of our brain. An idea you definitely want to be aware of is brain plasticity. There's a video here of this young girl who got half of her brain removed when she was a child, but she's able to recover, acts completely normal because the rest of her brain is kind of made up for those missing parts. It's much easier. Your brain is much more plastic when you're younger. The last section, 3C, which is what we have our Socratic seminar on, is not super complicated. There's not too much there. The one thing you want to focus on is genes. So you want to understand kind of which piece makes up each. So take a look at that. You have this diagram in your chart, in your book. So we have the cell. Inside that cell, inside the inner area of the cell, we have these chromosomes here. Those are largely made of DNA molecules. Within those, you have these segments of DNA, which are genes. Inside of those genes, the genes make up the DNA. So please be aware, take a look at this chart in your book. Heritability, this is a total just definitional question. It's just the variation among individuals that we can attribute to genes. Twin studies, do you know the different kinds of twins? Identical twins come from the same exact egg. Fraternal twins come from two different eggs that are inseminated that are fertilized at the same exact time. What we find is that twins are very much alike even if they're not raised in the same environment. There are tons of videos out there that can kind of show that to you. Okay. And then lastly, I know a question we'll have on our exam is kind of evolutionarily, what do men and women want? Men want healthy young women. Women want wealth and power. Not necessarily George Bush here, but they kind of want that image. Okay, things to be aware of for the possible FRQs. If you get the 3A FRQ, you're going to need to know about the nervous system, 3 kinds of neurons, action potential, neurotransmitters, and the synapse. If you get the 3B FRQ, you'll need to know these different parts of the brain as well as some brain scans. If you get the 3C FRQ, that has to deal with chromosomes, genes, forms of qualitative research, as well as how to set up a study. So that's that. If you have any questions, please let me know. I know I went through this quickly. Hopefully it helps.